Sam Garrett is, what would you call it, translator royalty. He's actually Herman's translator into English. Sam is an American, but you've lived in Amsterdam for about 30 years, longer than that, 30 years.
Almost 40, yeah.
40,
Almost,
gosh,
yeah.
yes. And it's wonderful to have the two of you together because I've known your name for so long as well. I mean, dare I say, almost as famous as, don't tell him, but almost, in translator circles. It's great to meet you. And and you've translated also another book we're going to be talking about tonight, and three of the short stories from the Penguin anthology as well. So it's, you're quite a useful person to have tonight, I think. You translated that book, and so we'll stick to that one for the moment, dear Mr. M.
Yeah.
Now, that very first chapter is so threatening.
Yes.
And so evil and cruel in a way, and it does set the tone, doesn't it? He's a stalker, this guy, but we don't know the nature of the stalking until much later. No. Did you read right to the end of the novel before you started translating it? Did you need to know what happened and who'd done it before you started translating?
No, in this case, not. That wasn't really. I did read the novel in its entirety before I started, but it wasn't really necessary to me to know how it ended in order to get that first chapter right. Herman, in this case, got it right, and it was there for me to translate and to do and to preserve how menacing that first chapter is. And the wonderful thing is that there's that menace, but you don't know what form that takes. And again, Herman would not be Herman if he didn't send you down the wrong path a few times, make you wonder exactly what's going on, making you wonder exactly who is the villain here, who is the hero, whether there are any heroes at all of those things. It's a real call.
You're guessing as much as we are, then, to a certain degree.
Yeah, I think often that when translating a book, even though I've read it maybe a few times before I start, in the course of translating it, there's also, for me at least, there's a kind of a forgetting that goes on too. I'm trying to experience the book as though I were reading it also for the first time.
Now, Herman, did you plot the book from? We can't give anything away. Obviously, we can't. No. That'd be the worst thing to do. But do you start with the twist? Do you know what's going to happen at the end? And work backwards. You don't?
No, I never do. No, I never do, but in this case and in most books, I don't. I want not to be bored by my own schemes and plans. But I also think a second advantage of this is that the reader will be surprised as well, because he will be as surprised as I am. So the example in this book, Dear Mr. M, is, well, it's only a plot line, you know. It's like there is a thriller plot line next to the book as well, which is that a teacher in the 70s, a high school teacher, disappeared. And he was never found, his body was never found, and two students were accused of having a hand in this. But during the whole writing of the book, I had no idea where this teacher ended up. And so even some of my friends or family members, I sometimes told them a little bit about what I was writing about. I said, do you know already, they sent me texts, do you know where the teacher is already? I said, no, still I don't. The thing is that in the end, maybe we'll find out. But there are no signs for the reader where this teacher has ended up. The reader can never know it because the writer, which is me, didn't have a clue where he ended up. And this is an advantage point.
I think that's clear as mud. No, it's really, that is, because I wondered about that, whether you knew actually at the end. But it's the journey, if you like, as much as the actual twist. But there is always what I think people call now a Herman Koch twist in the tale. I mean, there's a lot of, people always say, you know, your books are also about dystopias, they're about sort of amoral, middle-class men a lot of the time. And this kind of character does appear in all your books. Now, you're not an amoral, middle-class, morose Dutchman at all. But why are you so fascinated by these kinds of
Thank you. I don't know.
You're going to lie on the couch now?
Yeah.
Why do you like these?
Well, I don't know. It's something that fascinates me. You know, the ordinary middle class world, and I also reckon the literary world to the middle class world. You know, they're all. It's more or less the same. Sometimes writers think they're extraordinary or they're outside of society or whatever. I think they're very much into the society thing, even when they talk about politics, or mostly when they talk about politics. Anyway, it's something that has ever caught my attention, and thinking as a tension point, I like to think, what would I do in this morally, when there's a moral twist, would I go left or would I go right? And then the advantage of writing a novel is that you can put all sides and all opinions in it, and you don't have to express yourself as a writer about it, not judge. But you know that the easy way out book, where the villain, if there is a villain, is sent to prison in the end or arrested by a detective. No. It's more like real life.
Yeah.
We live on.
Yeah.
You know, we get elected president, for example. But
For the most dubious reasons, yeah.
yeah.
The other reason, which is wonderful to have the two of you together, is because you are both great fans of a great novel that has only just been translated into English. It was published 70 years ago in Dutch. And I know, Herman, you're a great fan of this, and Sam's a great, because he actually translated it. But it's called The Evenings, and it's by a Dutch writer called Gerard Reve. And tell us about Reve, and why it's only happening now. This has been published by Pushkin Press. It's just come out. We're doing another kind of launch of several books tonight. And this is so stunning and so special. You just wonder, why has it not been translated before now?
I can talk about that, and I think Herman also probably has things to say about Gerard Reve as a writer, too. The reason why, really, is that there are a few reasons. In the Netherlands, for a long time, and even as I was working on the translation, there had been a sort of myth in place that the work of Gerard Reve was somehow untranslatable. Not even maybe so much for linguistic reasons or because his prose was so playful. That it was not the same reasons that people probably say that something like Finnegan's Wake is ostensibly impossible to translate, but because people say it is so Dutch. The book is seen as, by many people, as the quintessence of Dutchness, of Dutch humor, of Dutch boredom, of what it means to be in a city, like Amsterdam in the dark days around Christmas, to be more or less locked up by the weather, and then the worst punishment of all, to be in this room with your parents. Terrible fate. All those things, and also Reve's colleagues, and not the least among them, also claimed that his prose, and not just specifically the Evenings, but other works of Reve's, were untranslatable, and said things like, well, his work is all about style and not about content, and nobody wants to read about it. If you read a book, you want to read a book so you enjoy it, not worry about the style. So there were all kinds of myths. That's one thing. And the other thing was that Reve himself was as a young writer, was bound and determined to write in English. He actually, for a while there, expressed a very low opinion of the Dutch language, called at one point, saying, when he decided he was going to become an English language writer, calling it a regional patois and that sort of thing, and the typical sort of comment of his. And I think that later on, that when things of his were translated, he took a pretty critical stance. He wasn't really, I don't think he was really wildly enthusiastic about the idea of being translated into English, particularly.
Well, He died. So he died about 10 years ago, I think. So,
Yeah, 10 years ago.
And maybe you hadn't been asked to do it. So
No, that's right. That's right.
Because the language is fantastic. I mean, it is a kind of it was set in 1947, so just after the war, and the language is a wonderful and very readable mixture of sort of 40s English, if you like. You've kept that era very very much in place, and then very modern, very readable, very accessible. Now, this book's taught in schools. It's a set text, I think, isn't it, in the Netherlands?
It's one of those things that appears on the reading list, isn't it?
It's amazing. I think.
Yeah, but I think there's sometimes I think it's a mistake. I remember that as a 16-year-old in school, I was also recommended to read this book. There's something about that. It's 16-year-old, you're too long because then you think it's too many pages, and it's actually it might be a bit boring. It's really an adult book. I think you should read it from the age of 25. Well, maybe that's not a good recommendation, but is somebody here under the age of 25? Well, no, don't. But there is something about this book that you have to appreciate it more like a good ripe wine when it's, when you're older yourself, I believe. But I'm not sure. This is my experience. And then many young school children say, "Oh no, the evenings, so boring, you know."
It's a bit like
But there are very good
Dickens,
boring books that youngsters find boring.
Well, maybe. But it is about boredom. I don't know how he wrote a book, such a sort of gripping book about boredom. The whole book is about a bored young man. He's 23, he's called Fritz. And he's completely and utterly bored. He hates, there's no story, there's no plot line. And still it manages to grip.
Yeah.
I mean, this may sound incredibly off-putting, but it's not. It somehow keeps going because the language is so wonderful and sort of seductive in a way. Now, Sam, you're going to read an extract from this book, so you get a real feel from the beginning of the book, I think we can say.
Like to do that.
And it is as Herman himself said about this book, it is, and I love this quote, the funniest, most exhilarating book about boredom ever written. And the other thing I think that's really interesting, if you know your literature as well, and you also said that if it had appeared earlier, say if it had been translated in English earlier, it would have been on a par with Catcher in the Rye or On the Road. So you really believe it's that kind of...
I really believe when this book would be translated when came it out, 48, was it?
47 was
47.
published.
47, yeah. When it
yeah,
would have been published at the same time as like On the Road or The Catcher in the Rye, it would have been not only a Dutch classic, but I think at that time it would have been an international classic.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Sam, if you'd be kind enough to read us an extract, so to have the translator himself read from Gerard Reve, I think we can feel him somewhere in the room. I'm sure he'd enjoy the...
I hope so. What I'm going to read actually seems in some ways quite obvious, because I'm going to read the first couple of pages of the novel. Not so much because I couldn't come up with anything else to read, but because, in fact, there are two things. The first few pages of the evenings is actually sort of a perfect prefigurement of the rest of the novel, of what goes on. As you'll see, we're going to pick up on some of Fritz's obsessions, on the fact that he dreams a lot, spends a lot of time in bed thinking about when he's going to get up. And we find that here. But maybe even more importantly is that in translating, there's this first sentence of the book is in my mind, and I can remember fretting over it and worrying about it and being pleased and dissatisfied and all those things. It is probably, for Dutch post-war literature, it's probably the first sentence is the call me Ishmael of Dutch postmodern literature. Let's see. I did have glasses. That might help. That might help.
They're on your head.
No.
Not the ones on your head.
Oh, good. The ones on my head. Thank you very much, Rosie. Thank you. Thank you very much. It was still dark in the early morning hours of the 22nd of December, 1946, on the second floor of the house at Schilderskade 66 in our town, when the hero of this story, Frits van Echters, awoke. He looked at the luminous dial of his watch hanging on its nail. 6:15, he mumbled. It's still night. He rubbed his face. What a horrible dream, he thought. What was it again? Gradually, it came back to him. He had dreamed that the living room was full of visitors. "It's going to be a glorious weekend," someone said. At that same moment, a man in a bowler hat walked in. No one paid him any heed, and no one greeted him, but Fritz eyed him closely. Suddenly, the visitor fell to the floor with a thud. Was that it, he thought? What happened after that? Nothing, I believe. He fell asleep again. The dream went on where it had stopped. His bowler pressed down over his face. The man was now lying in a black coffin that had been placed on a low table in one corner of the room. I don't recognize that table, Fritz thought. Did we borrow it from someone? Then, peering into the coffin, he said loudly, "We'll be stuck with this till Monday in any event." "I wouldn't be so sure about that," said a bald, red-faced man with spectacles. "Would you care to wager that I can arrange the funeral for this afternoon at 2? Fritz awoke once more. It was 20 minutes past 6. "I've had enough sleep," he said to himself. "That's why I woke up so early. I still have more than an hour to go." He dozed off eventually and entered the living room for the third time. There was no one there. He walked over to the coffin, looked into it, and thought, "He's dead and starting to rot." Suddenly, the cadaver was covered in all kinds of carpenter's tools, piled to the coffin's rim. Hammers, drills, saws, spirit levels, planes, pliers, and little bags of nails. All that stuck out was the dead man's right hand. "There's no one here," he thought, "not a soul in the house. What am I going to do? Music, that always helps." He leaned across the coffin to turn on the radio, but at that same moment saw the hand, bluish now and with long white nails, begin to stir. He recoiled in fear. "I mustn't move," he thought, "otherwise it will happen." The hand sank back down. Later he awoke, feeling anxious. 10 to 7, he mumbled, peering at the watch. "I always have such horrible dreams." He rolled over and fell asleep again. Parting a pair of thick green curtains, he entered the living room. The visitors had returned. The man with the red face came up to him, smiled, and said, "It didn't work out. It will have to be Monday morning at 10. We can put the box in the study till then." Study, Fritz thought. What study? Do we have a study? He means the side room, of course. 6 men lifted the coffin to their shoulders. He himself walked out in front to open the door for them. The key's still in the lock, he thought. Good thing, too. The coffin was extremely heavy. The bearers moved slowly with measured strides. Suddenly, he saw that the bottom of the box was beginning to sag and swell. "It's going to burst," he thought. "That's hideous. The corpse is still intact on the outside, but inside it's a thin yellow mush. It will splatter all over the floor." By the time they were halfway down the hall, the bottom was sagging so badly that it had begun to crack. Slowly, out of that crack, appeared the same hand from which he had recoiled. Gradually, the whole arm followed. The fingers groped about, then crept towards the throat of one of the bearers. "If I scream, the whole thing will fall to the floor," Fritz thought. He watched as the bottom sagged further and further, and the hand drew closer and closer to the bearer's throat. "There's nothing I can do," he thought. "I can't do a thing." He awakened for the 4th time and sat up in bed. It was 7:35. The bedroom was cold. He sat there for 5 minutes, then stood up and, turning on the light, saw the window panes covered in flowers of frost.